Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. So, Mr. Blake and I have rearranged our living room, so now I'm in the yellow chair, which spins. Also, in case I've never explained this, behind me back there is Mr. Blake's workspace. Mine is over there. We share an office, and by an office, I mean a one-bedroom apartment. Okay, so the answer you are looking for is yes, is now available. Hooray! I'm starting to get people showing up and telling me which one is their favorite, which I love to hear. So please do feel free to share that with me. That was my dog expressing disappointment that I am once again talking. He's on the couch. I've forgotten to get myself a beverage because I have very little time and lots of stuff to talk about. So everything's going well. This month's spell read is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which I'm really excited about. I've been wanting to read this book for a long time. I actually bought it ages ago, and then I decided I wanted to save it for Halloween time, the season of macabre, etc. So yeah, so that is what we're reading this month. Very excited about it. It is Gothic, it is horror, so if you have like content sensitivity, you should probably Google the trigger warnings. I generally don't do trigger warnings because I like to go into books sort of not knowing what's coming, and that's kind of the highlight of Gothic literature is that it's very like sensationalized, very romanticized horror. So yeah. I don't want to know what's coming, but if you do, definitely Google. Excited to talk about it. There's a couple of movies that are coming out that I'm excited about too. If you were with us last year and you read Rebecca and Jane Eyre, there is a new adaptation of Rebecca that's coming out October 21st on Netflix. I will definitely be watching that, so if you want to talk about it. Also, The Witches on HBO, October 22nd, very exciting. I do really love Anne Hathaway, especially when she's playing sort of like a darker character. And I loved the book The Witches by Roald Dahl, so I'm so excited for that. And I'm bringing up all these things that you might want to chat with me about because I will be doing an Ask Me Anything on Discord for Halloween weekend for the Department of Fanfiction server. I know like truly nothing about Discord, so this will be very new for me. I will also plan to be like very around on Tumblr as well, so if you've been around here for a while, I used to do a lot of like kind of like Tumblr sleepovers where I would just sort of be around to answer questions, and a lot of them would just be random and storytelling and advice and stuff. So Halloween weekend, if you want to celebrate with me on the internet, I will be here. Typically, I spend every Halloween drinking the Tau Capamu signature cocktail from Lovely Tangled Vices and cathartically sobbing to Steel Magnolias. So I will also be doing that if you want to do that with me, but that tends to kind of be a me thing. So that's Halloween weekend. I'm just kind of warning you in advance because if you're like sad that you can't do anything, your consolation prize is that you can like hang out with me virtually. That's not a great consolation, but it's there. I know many of you are probably tired of hearing me talk about politics, but I did get an ask this weekend that sort of revealed to me that, maybe people aren't totally aware of how, like the ins and outs of elections, which is fair because the American electoral system is very complicated and it's not necessarily what was laid out in the Constitution. So, just as a little recap, if you already read my post on Tumblr, someone asked a question that I didn't fully understand, and then they came back and sort of went further into detail. So first, I'm going to sort of restate my answer about the problems with the two-party system and the Electoral College, and then we'll work back through this like clarification of what they were actually trying to ask. They were mostly talking about these polarizing issues where basically the right and the left fall on one side or the other of abortion was one of the ones they brought up, or marriage equality. And I would say that healthcare is probably also falls under that like list of controversial. I don't know why, but I don't know why healthcare would be controversial, but it is. So one of the things I said was that the American government was basically, when the founders set it up, their biggest fear was the tyranny of a king. They had just won the Revolutionary War, like barely. Most of them, came over seeking religious freedom. So it was very much about the separation of church and state because in England, you had to be part of the Church of England. So if you were anything else, you were like going to die. Like, there was a good chance that you could be killed for your beliefs. So that was the number one thing that they had in their minds. And also, they did not want a powerful executive branch, which is why they set up the 3 branches to sort of like counteract each other. This is not working right now. We'll get into why. There was still a debate that would come out later in a little thing called the Civil War about whether states should rule themselves or the federal government should have like a lot of power. And obviously everyone who was afraid of having a powerful king did not want a powerful federal government. So they were kind of the belief that after George Washington, who was the war hero, nobody would ever get 51% of the popular vote. So their assumption was that basically what would happen if one candidate did not win 51% of the vote? Then it would come down to the Senate, which is made up of equal representation from each of the states. So essentially, the Senate would nominate a person to be president, much in the same way the British Parliament chooses their prime minister from within the party that wins. So it was really set up to be more like the British parliamentary system. But the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists that became the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans like really mobilized people into basically these 2 polarized groups where it always fell into this idea of like, there's one controversial issue and you either fall on this side or you fall on this side. And because of that, there has always been a person that has won 51% or more. So yes, one of the biggest flaws is the 2-party system because it makes it seem like every issue has to be black and white. There is no such thing as gradations because yes, there are third-party candidates. And this is one of the really important things I want to drive home. A third-party candidate can't actually win the election because of the Electoral College. So what happens with the Electoral College is the system is winner take all for the region. So if in whatever the breakdown for, say, California, where Democrats typically win, if the Democratic candidate gets 80% of the popular vote, they also take all the electoral votes for that region, which means that everyone who voted third party gets lumped into the Democratic candidates, like, win. So what happened with Donald Trump, you can't say for sure that he won the Electoral College because of third-party voters. I mean, no one can say that for sure. But he did get very lucky in that he won a lot more votes than he was supposed to get because people who voted Libertarian or who voted for a write-in candidate like Bernie, for example, that ended up getting lumped into his overall Electoral College win. Just as a reminder, if you don't like Biden, it's understandable. One of the issues is that the left is it's not very far left, and especially Biden is very, very centrist. But that is the reason that he got the nomination, because there are lots of people who are concerned about being too socialist, like Bernie or Liz Warren. And there are also lots of people who still want a certain kind of person in office. And so that made Biden a very popular choice and sort of the most likely to beat Trump, even though when it comes down to it, they look, because they're both old white men, like they're similar candidates, even though they very much are not. But I understand there are people who think that they're not going to get what they want from Biden, and that's probably true. And you don't stop participating in government because you don't get what you want from the president. But what the president does is actually very, very limited. Like I said, there are supposed to be checks and balances within the 3 branches of government. The Supreme Court is supposed to be made up of the 9 smartest people in the country. That's who's supposed to be on the Supreme Court. The idea of the Supreme Court justices having lifetime terms is because they were supposed to be no one could ever possibly be as educated as these 9 people were. But as we've seen in practice, that's not working because mostly the Senate, the president, and whoever the justice choice is are sort of colluding. Marvelous. What we really need to do is flip the Senate in addition to swapping out our president, but we'll see how that goes. Okay. So back into more of this question. I'm a fairly new voter and I'm not totally familiar with the process yet, which is why I was explaining the Electoral College and why it doesn't benefit us. Even if you feel very strongly driven towards a third-party candidate's beliefs, you still sort of have to... I understand that you want to vote your conscience. I get that. But it's a symbolic vote in the end, and it very likely will go towards the candidate that you least like. If that person happens to be, say, the 45th president of the United States. So you kind of have to think about, yes, your morals are important, but you can keep fighting for those. The idea isn't that we just okay, the Democratic candidate won, and now we just stop caring about politics. Most of politics is enacted on a local and state level before it even ever comes to the federal level. So anyway, I was trying to say, as someone in the Christian circle, I know a lot of people who know Trump is a bad person, yet are lining up to vote for him anyway, due almost entirely to wanting to see abortion overturned. These are people who would obviously wrongly consider themselves loving and kind people, ignoring many of their values for one issue. Yes, I know a lot of women, and I'm sure there are men who really believe the stories about babies fighting while being aborted, which is not true. One of the things that came up this week is sort of the conflation of issues about miscarriage and how abortion fits into that because of the Chrissie Teigen thing. I'm not going to go into detail because I know that's very sensitive for a lot of people. But essentially, the anti-abortion stance, a lot of it is based on completely unscientific data, and it's really it's damaging to women too, because then women who have a miscarriage, that a lot of it, a lot of these really severe abortion laws they basically criminalize the mother for doing nothing wrong. For example, Mike Pence, in Indiana, he brought up this law that's that's essentially if a woman has a miscarriage after 9 weeks, which is extremely, extremely early in the pregnancy, that's, pretty much well before the first trimester, that death has to be recorded. It has to get a death certificate. Even though that baby it's not a baby yet, it could not live outside of the mother's body. And since the mother didn't even do anything wrong, that's punishing her quite a bit. That's saying you killed something, which is awful. A lot of the politics around abortion have just become this really crazy, let's make it the mother's fault. Which, yeah, I just wanted to bring up because it makes it so hard for women. It makes it so that women can't talk about their experience and their loss, and they have to suffer that quietly and shamefully, even though it's nothing to be ashamed of. So yeah, it is. It's really hard for that to be such a driving issue of the Christian faith when what was so important, what the foundation of our country is a separation of church and state. You can believe abortion is wrong without forcing other people to act in accordance to that belief, especially if it endangers the mother and it makes it much more difficult for women who are suffering something that's completely out of their control. It's just, it's relevant to the conversation that's been happening this week, especially a lot of mothers who are kind of revealing for the first time that they had these struggles as part of infertility, or as, if they're happy now and they have children now and they still have these experiences that they just didn't tell anyone about. And, it's hard. It's hard on a woman's mental health, and to think that you are less valuable than this, truly a cluster of cells that, yes, is trying hard to be a person, but isn't yet, is very hard. When I say the left is fractured, I mean that we want healthcare, we want action on climate change, we want something to be done about policing, but we don't agree on how it should be accomplished. And I've seen many people outright refuse to vote for Biden because he doesn't offer every single thing they're looking for on every issue. That's what I was trying to say by saying it's fractured. I agree, but I think the right is fractured as well. There are plenty of Republicans who know Trump is a buffoon, and that's why I think Biden is kind of the leading candidate, because he does appeal to certain Republicans. Essentially, the Republican Party right now is alt-right. It's not even far-right. It's insane right. They are, they kind of have this narrative about how you can't trust the media. There's all these conspiracy theories. They're putting the blame, and it has become this insane, it's not even about politics. It's just about conserving power. So, there are Republicans who like Mitt Romney or John McCain who are probably going to vote left in this election, and they're not happy about it either. But the right is what it is. And yeah, I understand people are looking for one candidate to fit all their needs. That's never going to happen. That's the problem with the two-party system. There's never going to be, of a choice between two things, the perfect thing. However, like I said, things happen on not just the presidential stage is actually quite limited. What the president really does is set a tone for how the rest of government operates. And the tone right now is a bullying one, a prejudiced one. It's awful. I don't see the right struggle so hard with the third party or not voting issues, so I wondered if GOP lawmakers are actively not seeing through one of the core party values in order to keep the party together and voting for them. So essentially, this person is saying that they think that the reason that abortion hasn't already been made illegal is because Republicans are just not, they want to keep that issue on the table, which I'm sorry to say is very incorrect. Right now, nobody can make abortion illegal. On a federal level, that can't happen because of the Supreme Court case Roe v. Wade. Trump doesn't legislate. He can't legislate. He can sign things into law, but he can't bring them up. What he can do, and what he has done, is appoint people to the Supreme Court who have previously made it clear that they're very anti-abortion. So basically, what would happen next if Amy Coney Barrett was appointed, she's been appointed, if she was approved by the Senate and was placed on the Supreme Court, they now have the conservative even though that's crazy to think, now have the majority. So what would happen next is that someone from the lower courts at a federal level would bring an abortion case before the Supreme Court. They would agree to hear it. In the past, they have not agreed to hear all cases on abortion because Roe v. Wade has always covered it, and they wouldn't necessarily change their minds. But now, when you have just completely new doctrines on the Supreme Court, they would move forward with an abortion case. They would overturn the Roe v. Wade decision, probably make it very narrow. They would make it, I don't know what they would make it. But once Roe v. Wade is overturned and has been replaced by newer precedent, then it's fair game for states to legislate as they want. And then the federal government Congress would probably bring something forth as well, depending what the Supreme Court's decision was. But where you're making the mistake is that they can't do it right now, but they can do it very soon. So I know you probably feel like it's an empty threat. It's very much not an empty threat. And it's not just abortion, it's marriage equality too. And it's healthcare. Right now, they haven't been able to get rid of Obamacare because the Supreme Court has stood in their way. They have said several times that Obamacare is constitutional, and that the important parts of it that the Republican Party wants to strike down, they have to be permitted on a federal level. But yeah, the way laws work is the Supreme Court doesn't make laws, the president doesn't make laws, only Congress makes laws. But they're checked by the Supreme Court saying you can or cannot do these things, and then by the president signing them into law. And also the president is who selects who gets to be not just on the Supreme Court, but also in the federal courts, which are also lifetime appointments. So this means basically that if a state court hears a case on abortion and it decides something crazy, then the higher court can overrule its decision and sort of send it back. And that's basically everything that has happened with any type of abortion legislation, is that you can't do it because the Supreme Court has already said you cannot interfere. But if they change their minds, then that door is open. And it's open to not just anti-abortion laws, but also criminalizing miscarriages. It's open to controlling whether women should have children. But yeah, so then they're able to control a lot more than just abortion, which is kind of why I think you're seeing a lot of panic around something that feels like maybe not so significant to you. But it really is a snowball effect because once Roe v. Wade is overturned, it really does open the door for a lot of other things. Same with marriage equality, same with healthcare. We're going to lose a lot of the stuff that we have if this Supreme Court nomination goes through. And part of it is because Trump has chosen very, very politically minded judges who are there not to actually hear the law neutrally, not as the founders imagined it, where it's literally the 9 wisest men in the country are listening to something and deciding based on the facts of the case. They're choosing people who have predetermined agendas to make something happen. They're going to choose what cases they want to hear in order to get the political outcome they want as a result of their party alliance. So there's really a lot more at stake here than just who's president. So it's weird where you've both overestimated how much Trump can do and underestimated it. But yeah, I hope that answers your question, which is, it's more like your suspicion that Trump isn't going to actually act. He definitely is going to, and he definitely is now. So yeah, Also, I'm sorry about your grandma. I mean, this is, okay. I try not to like talk trash on religion, but it's hard not to see that Christians have this sort of problem, like specifically like many Protestants, because they are majority white, and just Christianity in general. Look at colonialism, imperialism. Part of Christianity's agenda is to convert as many people to their thought process as possible. Again, I say this as a Catholic. I'm not saying that religion is inherently a bad thing. I think that the theology of religion is beautiful, of like every religion is beautiful. But then you look at their history and the sort of behaviors and proselytization and forced conversion, and it just kind of all comes together in kind of a dark way. That was a lot. But quick thing, I need some big sister advice. Had a Karen experience at the grocery store and I am fuming. I was waiting in line. I was waiting in one line, the cashier waved me up. Then this woman in the other line proceeds to accuse me of cutting her off and being ignorant to how lines work. The cashier jumped in to respond, saying she called me up, so Karen stopped yelling at me. But Karen didn't even apologize to me. Instead, the cashier was apologizing to Karen. I stood frozen the entire time. Best way to handle this in the future. I see how you're frustrated. I mean, obviously, that would be a terrible thing to just like feel so powerless. Feeling powerless is truly the worst thing in the world. But I think that I don't know that there is a better way to handle it. I mean, it's like what the outcome would be disastrous kind of no matter what. Like the Karen is not going to learn from this interaction. I think the idea is that like you want to give her a consequence, you know, you want her to suffer some sort of punishment so she'll like learn. But chances are she won't. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, basically every Karen has like lacked any true suffering. The whole Karen idea comes from this concept of privilege and this idea that that most of the world works in a way that it moves to her benefit. And you can see even in this interaction that it does. She throws a fit and the cashier apologizes to her. So she ends up feeling like she's the one in the right and everyone around her is incompetent. But unfortunately, I mean, if this were like someone you worked with and saw all the time, it would probably be worth dealing with. But I've seen a lot of like, you know, you have these interactions and yeah, you could like clap back or whatever, but I'm not sure that would actually make you feel any better. I think all it would do is escalate an ugly situation. Like the what's her name? God, I can't believe that was still this year, who was like yelling at that bird watcher and she was like threatening to call the police while like strangling her dog. I just don't think you're really ever in a position to like inform her as to the error of her ways. If you want to feel like you have a little bit more autonomy, you can say something in your own defense. It is unfortunate that the cashier apologized to her. It seems that, you know, if the cashier had apologized to you, that would have been a little bit more obvious as to who was actually at fault. I mean, like, if you spin the scenario out in a bunch of different ways, you could ask that she apologizes to you, but then of course she doesn't. And then what do? You have to sit there and like wait for her to decide to do it. I feel like most scenarios are like pretty lose-lose because this is completely not your fault. Demanding something from her that she's not going to give you is just going to make her feel like you're the enemy and not that she's doing something foolish. There's no way to like embarrass her really. I mean, if you happen to think of something quick on the spot, then I guess they do respond most often to being humiliated. It's a very Trumpian idea. That's just like the worst thing that could ever happen to them is feeling like a fool, even though they are. But yeah, I'm sorry to say that I don't think that there's a good solution to this. I mean, I really am starting to feel like we just live in this world where like some of the occupants are just possessed and like there's no logic, there's nothing. I talked to some woman at the grocery store who just like accosted me to like ask me to like inform me that Fauci was a fraud and was paid off by the Chinese government. And I was like, I'm in Trader Joe's. Like what is this? People are real crazy right now. It's very concerning. But you can't argue with crazy and you can't make crazy feel shame and you certainly can't make crazy see logic. So in this case, I think you got to go with the just like, let this one go somehow. I mean, it happens to a lot of us. And it's really unfortunate that people who act like this do tend to get what they want, which is really, it's like, that's the worst part. But like, what's really hard is for this cashier, basically, who just like probably has to deal with this all the time and already knows that the easiest, the way to make it go by the fastest is to just apologize and move on. And I get why that's frustrating for you, but imagine how this cashier feels. They probably deal with this several times an hour. So unfortunately, we're just going to have to, you know, overthrow the system, eat the rich, etc., etc. Okay, well, I thought this was going to be short. This has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.